Welcome to Generations, a show which helps people 50 and better lead happy, healthy, and productive lives. Hosted today by Nadia Giordana, and here's Nadia.
Hello, and welcome to Generations, the Roundtable Edition. I'm Nadia Giordana, and co-hosting with me today is Sue Batesel. Welcome, Sue.
Thank you.
And Lynn Garthwaite.
Hi.
Hi, Lynn. Nice to have you here, too. And we have two very exciting guests today. I'm real excited about talking with you ladies. Terri Hawthorne and Luella Greene are both with an organization called Women's International League for Peace and Freedom. Is that correct?
Big name.
Big name, WILPF. And tell us about, get us started on the discussion with that.
Well, we had an exciting year. It's the 100th anniversary of WILPF, and our local branch is celebrating the 93rd anniversary, and we are celebrating the 20th anniversary of the WILPF Arts Committee, and that's what we're here to talk about, our recent exhibit. The exhibit was to our local celebration of the 100th anniversary. And I have here Luella Greene, or Jane Addams, the founder of WILPF from 1915. Do you want to talk a little bit about the beginnings?
I saw your portrayal of Jane Addams in the documentary, and that was fantastic.
Oh, thank you.
Wonderful.
Thank you. She was an extraordinary woman, as were all the rest of the women who helped start the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom back in 1915. It is a peace and justice organization and a women's organization, but it was actually begun by suffragists during World War I because they were not able to have their usual international suffragist alliance meeting because of the war. It was scheduled to be in Berlin, but that wasn't possible, so the president of the International Alliance said, we have to meet anyway. This is a very important time, and so she contacted Jane Addams, this well-known social worker and suffragist in the United States, and they ended up meeting at The Hague, and that's really when the organization began. And the purpose of the first meeting was to set up mediation to end the war, World War I, and to end all wars. So they had a very ambitious goal. Now the organization, as Terri said, is 100 years old, and it is now in 37 countries, 3 continents, and there are local branches, and our local branch that we belong to is the Minnesota Metro branch, and that's our arts committee is a part of that. And maybe Terri, you want to talk about the UN conference?
The Arts Committee grew out of the 20th anniversary, the United Nations 4th World Conference on Women held in Beijing, China in 1995. 1975 was declared the UN Year of the Women, and very soon it became obvious that a year was not sufficient, and it became the Decade of Women. And so they were talking all those years about what were the issues of global women, what were the concerns, and major ones like health and education for girls. And anyway, so they talked about the issues, and by the time the Beijing meetings were set up, they were talking about what are the actions we can take. The end document from that is the platform for action. And so Marilyn Cuneo, who was our 20-year convener, said, well, what about the arts? There's no arts in these documents, these pre-documents we were looking at. And so a bunch of us got together and formed an arts committee before Beijing.
So the arts committee part really was born out of the Minnesota division, Minnesota chapter of this organization?
Right. To the best of our knowledge, arts are used in social action organizations a lot, the Great Big Puppets. We work closely with Heart of the Beast Theater Company here, who do a lot of community activism. And so it's not unusual, but to have a dedicated arts committee that works that way, to the best of our knowledge, we're the only one in the only branch in the country that has one.
And did you draw mostly Minnesota artists, or did they come from all over?
The women in our committee are all Minnesota women. But our art projects have included many organizations. The name of our art show is Women Creating Art for Peace and Gender Justice, 20 Years of Collaborations. And right after Beijing, we were quite large, maybe 30, but most of the time we've been between 12 and 15 people.
Yes.
That's the committee.
The committee. And the only reason we've been able to do these gigantic things is we've done major collaborations with Heart of the Beast, with Minnesota, with the Perpich Center for Arts Education, our only dedicated Minnesota art school, and the composer there, Janneke van der Velde.
Right, and it ended up then, there were so many, I can't begin to name them all, but the Women's Chorale, and what were some of the other?
Calliope Women's
Calliope,
Chorus.
right.
We've done projects with the Minnesota Chamber Society. Through Janneke, we've reached many of the music arts groups, and we've had over 100 collaborators over the years. We did a major work with Minnesota Advocates for Human Rights, who do international work.
Do you have exhibits every year?
No, that seems a bit daunting after
be a
we've
big
just finished this. This was a retrospective of our work over the 20 years. So that was part of the title of the exhibit. At this exhibit, however, we also had programs every day. This was at the end of April. 8 days was long was the exhibit, and we had Sandy Pappas, who talked about her global work, and we had a attorney from the who's worked with trafficking, and some of the artists who've worked with us. So we had a full program at the same time.
Oh, I understand that the materials have been archived now in a local college. Can you tell us about that?
We are
can the public
so
see them?
excited. Putting this show together was a big effort. It wasn't just 20 paintings that we had, you know, in this nice little box somewhere. The artwork, our artwork is very eclectic to begin with, and so it's and we've ended up doing a lot of performance pieces, so there's backdrops, and the artwork was in our attics and in our basements, in the back of the closet and under the beds. So one of the reporters who worked with us said, well, is it in the museum or in an archive somewhere? And we said, no, don't we wish. So we're just elated that St. Catherine's University here in the Twin Cities is the new home of the entire 20 years of artwork and the 20 years of research. Our projects, you said, did we do a show every year? The shows were based on whatever research project we were working on. So sometimes we spent 2 or 3 years on a project before we got there. And so all those books and articles and literature and resource lists are all going to be available for international scholars at St. Catherine's. They're putting most of that work online.
Nice.
Oh, that'll be wonderful.
And is it open to the public at all?
It will be open to the public.
So it will be so it will remain on display in that sense, right?
Right. They said they think they're going to have an exhibit maybe a year from now, but we hope they're also going to have the documentary online as well for the public to utilize.
So our work will go on in that sense. committee may not continue. We're the younger people on the committee, so you get an idea. We've lost some members who have died, actually, and so we're so excited about that. And Terri has a great story about wanting her grandchildren to come see. I wish you'd tell that story.
My children all know, I have 4 sons and their families, and they all know the kind of work I've been doing most of my life. But but I really, really wanted my grandchildren to come to this, to the documentary. And some of them are quite young, and I think my family might be a little nervous about some of our topics. We're talking about women and war and the effects of war on children, and hopefully doing that in a way that that is multi-generational. But when I thought about it, why I had this deep desire to have the kids there was that I wanted them to see that ordinary people can care about really big global issues and try to do something about it. We believe our mission is, of the Arts Committee, is in part to get the messages that are in that platform for action. What are the things that need to be done for the world to have peace and to have good communities to raise children and for women to be healthy?
I love that story, and I love the idea of allowing the children to see that ordinary people can care about big issues, worldwide issues.
I think another part of that is that people on our committee have not been professional artists, with the exception of one person who later in life has really developed her art. But we were ordinary people in that sense too, but we were passionate about carrying on what these UN conferences on women were all about. And we don't get a lot of information, I think, about really what's happening globally. And a lot of people think it's too much to understand, or we just thought this is a way to pull people in, to bring their attention to things that they ordinarily would not hear about, like, for example, female genital mutilation. A lot of people probably maybe have heard of it, but didn't really know what it was, and so we felt that despite our lack of artistic skills, we just sort of charged in and found that we could work with materials, with costumes and masks, and write some scripts and share that.
In spite of there not being any professional artists in our group, probably the most surprising thing at the end of these 20 years is how much of our work has been in performance. And we put out a number of calls. We put out a call that ended up as a poetry book on Beijing with women. We invited women from around the world to say what they thought the goals should be and what they wanted to see out of that. And we published a book that is in 17 languages and 5 alphabets. And then we put out a call that asked for women in Minnesota, global women, who had stories of some kind of human rights violations and who had survived. And we got the stories from young Ethiopian women about female genital mutilation. Those stories are right here in Minnesota. We got a beautiful story from a Hmong woman, Mary Yang, an immigrant who had a traditional marriage where she was kidnapped and then considered married to that man, who had war bombs in her village, who crossed the Mekong with 2 little children, didn't swim, bamboo poles under her arm, who suffered the difficulties of a refugee camp, who came to this country with not a bit of language, and who's now a successful medical assistant here on the west side.
That's a success story.
I thought the quilts were so perfect in depicting her life and her challenges.
An inspiration, isn't she? Isn't her story?
Yeah,
Yes.
I loved the quilts.
And that's a
yeah.
beautiful example of how art can explain somebody's heart, you know, how they felt about something, their emotions.
It's only through stories that we learn about other people, and that
It is.
very much of what we were trying to share.
Well, and the documentary, tell us a little bit of how that documentary, how that happened.
Beverly Crosby from this show and Mike Rosberg were coming over to do some background for an interview show,
Yeah.
including this one, and it grew from there. And we're very grateful to both Mike and Beverly.
And did you have more than one exhibition, or was it just? But there was a recent. It was mainly several days in April was the primary exhibition. Okay.
But as a retrospect, they'd all been previous exhibitions. So those 20 major projects had all been exhibited before.
Yeah, so Beverly was really filming these stations that displayed these different projects, which were about women's stories. And
She's going to join us in a few
yes,
minutes.
yes. So she can tell us more how that evolved into telling more of the story about how we began and about our organization.
There's over 60 videos in the archive collection, and many of those are demonstrating our performance pieces and some of the background kinds of things as
I'm
well.
interested in some of those performance pieces because you had so many of them, and there's a lot of work to coordinate and orchestrate that. How did you manage so many different talented people and getting those together?
Well, we really did not have a master plan to do all of these. It really developed as we went along. It was like someone would come up with an idea and bring it to the group and say, I was thinking about this, or did you see this article about, and we'd talk about it and come together as a group. It was really the best group experience I've ever had. And
People would come to the exhibit and they'd say, well, where's your work, Terri? And I'd say, well, I could tell you which pieces I worked on, but I'm part of this whole exhibit, as is Luella, as is, it's a very different kind of art.
Different
art
types
making.
of talent, absolutely. Yeah. And it brought all those things together. Do you know how many artists and performers were just roughly were involved? But that's kind of a hard question.
There's over 100. We did put our list together, and over 100 collaborators. So there's way more people. The big water show 2 years ago had over 500 kids involved, high school kids involved. So it's, our projects are gigantic.
That's so
That reminds me, I was going to ask, do you have a way for young people to get involved, to kind of carry on this work? Maybe through St. Catherine's that'll evolve.
we would love that, because that certainly is one of the difficulties, which many, probably most women's organizations
have.
Women are at work. They don't have the leisure
Sure. Absolutely. Well, we're going to bring Beverly on now to talk about that documentary that we mentioned briefly. So we're going to pause for a moment while we make that change. Welcome back. And we have Beverly Crosby with us, the filmmaker. Welcome, Beverly.
Thank you so much. And it's a great pleasure to be here with all of you women and talk about this wonderful project that we worked on for so long.
Excuse me. Yeah, tell us all about how that came about.
How that came about. Well, as you know, I think somebody mentioned Mike's name before he does this show. He promotes this show. And he had called me up and asked me if I'd come over to do some video footage of the exhibition, not knowing really what the exhibition was totally about. So we get there, and Terri and Luella, who was just with us, they walked me around the exhibition. There were about 18 to 20 tables. And at each table we stopped and they told me a little story about what, you know, the exhibition, the posters, the pictures, whatever happened to be there, puppets, whatever, you know, what it was about. And as I'm walking, I'm thinking, well, there's so many stories here. I mean, it wasn't about the exhibition per se, it was about everything that had happened, all the stories within the stories. Every table had many stories and they were all interconnected. So when we went back in the room and convened with Catherine and Mike, and we were talking, and somebody said something about a documentary, but the thing is that this exhibition was actually had been going on for, I think, what, Terri, maybe 4 or 5 days already. It was a week-long exhibition, so that meant that. If I was going to get any footage, I needed to come right away because there wasn't any other time left, you know. And all the women there, and a lot of the women there, without saying that they're all seniors, because they may not be, but a lot of them are.
Most of them.
Most of them are, aren't they? Yeah. In fact, Marilyn Cuneo, okay, is
91.
91. So we wanted to make sure to get, you know, to get some footage with her included. So what we went for and what we ended up with was totally a different story. With my business, people remember stories. I tell stories. I'm a storyteller. I'm a producer and editor, but you know, everybody has their stories. And so when I came back, I was asking these ladies about, you know, what they did in 20 years. You know, now how, you know, who can tell you in 5 minutes what you've done in the last 20 years? So the project took a lot longer. It was a process. It wasn't the way I normally start a project, but it was just a process. And little by little, I'd find out more, you know, about their stories. And I just knew that we had to get the story. You know, this was such a remarkable group of women. They had done so many wonderful things, not only to affect our community, but also to affect the world, our country and the world. And their stories are there in the documentary that I've done. The documentary is 75 minutes long. And it will be housed on, you know, a website, and that's that information will be soon to come. We talked about, I think you talked about the other films. Terri talked about all the films she had had. I want to give credit to her husband. He had actually taken footage of all of these performances over the years. And so we had a lot of what we call in our field, our profession, we had a lot of good B-roll that we could use to, you know, reimburse some of the things they were saying. So we could go back and show people in the documentary, we could show them little clips of some of the performances from the composers, things like that. So Jack, so thank you, Jack, for all your work too, because they contributed, and Terri does a lot of photography, so they contributed photographs and video footage for me to use too, to build the story. So it was a work in progress.
Were you there for several days?
I was there, I think, for 2 days, two and a half days I was there, and not sure of the whole storyline. Normally I get the storyline when I sit down with a client. I sit down and we talk about the storyline. We talk about what other type of footage they have on hand already. But I was there to do interviews with several of the ladies, not several, probably I think about 5 or 6 of the ladies, and to get their stories. So I was there, but then that was just the interviews. Then the real work started. It was a 5-month project. It turned out to be a 5-month project.
Can you give us an example of one of the stories you heard that day that made you realize this is bigger than you thought?
Oh, you know, gosh, they were just so fascinating. Each and every one of the stories, the tables, were just fascinating. In fact, I got to the point that I said, okay, wait a minute, I need to get this on film. You know, we need to come back another day, and I need to think about, you know, we need to think about the stories, and because every one of them was so interesting. I just, you know, what a privilege it was for me to work with these women, this group, and to be able to put something together that will not just serve, you know, not for just a memory piece for them, but an educational piece. Metro State, I believe, is going to be using the documentary in one of their classrooms to...
Really? That's so great.
Yes, and in St. Kate's, of course, St. Catherine's, they're going to house it, and that documentary will be, people from around the world will have access to it eventually. And so this has all just happened. We just had our big premiere, and it was wonderful. I just, I have met some of the most wonderful women, you know. I just feel as though they each became one of my best friends.
You know, you used a lot of your talents to wade through so much material. I do a little bit of editing on an amateur scale, so I can only imagine what it took to put together something so big, a big project like that. And the material that you started with, it must have been difficult to clip that down when you had to.
It was, it took a lot of my hours, you know. I didn't know. In the beginning, you know, I went to capture some B-roll footage for Mike, you know, and it wasn't until I was talking to Terri and Luella that really found out there were really so many more stories. There was no way to just take, you know, make it.
It was like a giant jigsaw puzzle of 20 years. Beverly had all of these themes and these projects. We had such a wide range. We haven't done the same kind of work. You know, the projects were so diverse, and she had to take all of that together and weave it together. It was like putting a giant jigsaw puzzle together.
Yes, and that was so fantastic. And we've run out of time. Thank you, Beverly, for coming on, telling us how this documentary came together. And thank you, ladies, for being here on the show, too. And thank you for watching Generations, the Roundtable Edition.